Hello.
Welcome to Full Send Living. We're in James. We're going through the book of James. This week's chapter 4. Let's get into it. Let's send it. Guys, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Nate Thompson. This is
Ethan Bricker here.
And we've been working our way through the book of James. So thanks for joining us. We're coming up to chapter 4. So if you haven't, check out 1, 2, and 3. Okay?
Okay. Yep, those episodes are already out.
They're out, baby.
Yep.
Let's get into it, man. Why not?
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. I'll start reading. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war and take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong, and you only want what will give you pleasure. I don't know. I'm gonna read this next chunk.
Okay,
Does that sound okay? And
Yep.
then we'll kick it around. You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again. If you want to be a friend with the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. What do you think the scripture means when they say that the Spirit God has placed within us is filled with envy? But he gives us even more grace to stand against such evil desires. As the scripture says, God opposes the proud, but favors the humble. So humble yourselves before God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come close to God, and he will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. All right, let's kick that around.
First off, the whole you ask, you do not receive because because you ask wrongfully. This is where I think in America, the prosperity message, which I'm not against in the right context, the prosperity message of become a Christian and all of these wonderful gifts and glorious promises will all happen for you, as if God's like a genie or something. And I just feel like this makes it so clear that it's when you ask him, you have to ask with the right heart and the right motive, which sets the precedence of who he is and how we talk to him. That he is God. He doesn't exist to just give us 3 wishes with our life. Right. You know what I mean? We exist for him, and I think a lot of times we just confuse that. We just do.
Well, and I think too, when I'm reading here, just the idea of just the greed that's us as societies, and how it's always the idea of just getting ahead of someone, but just getting ahead for yourself. And even when he says what's causing these quarrels and these fights, it's these evil desires that war within you. And when he talks about just the envy of just wanting more, always wanting, and never being satisfied by these things, because it's always, we know it, but we don't. I know it, but I don't ever want to actually accept it.
Yeah.
I know if I get something that I've been wanting, whether it's a job advancement or change or whatever, or a vehicle, that's one of my things right now. It's been haunting me for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not going to satisfy it.
Yeah.
It's just not gonna, because there's always going to be something better.
Yeah.
But that want and that greed that's like in us, that's always warring against us, and that causes us to just have made up thoughts, even about our friends, where we're like, like I don't know what it cost you to be you, in the way of like for you and Lydia to establish your family and stuff. I just have these ideas of like, well, how much money is he making? This and well, but you don't ever count the costs of what it takes for somebody to get something. You just see it and you think they don't deserve it or you should have it.
Yeah.
And I just feel like we don't want to give that away. We want to keep that envy and that greed. And
It makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel like you're within control of your world, even when you aren't, or whether you are or whatever. It just makes you feel more in control. When kind of comes back to the whole opinion thing, where it's like I have a lot of opinions because it makes me feel like I'm more in control of a world that I'm not in control of.
Yeah.
The one thing that I underlined was, therefore, whoever wishes, this is verse 4, therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. I think it's super cool that he says we make ourselves an enemy of God, and that it doesn't say that God sees you as his enemy. Yeah. It's like there's two armies at war with one another, and you stood in the middle and you had the opportunity to choose to be on God's team. And then we walked over to the other team that was ready to like throw a bunch of grenades at him, but then sometimes it's like we act like God sits on his throne and he's making us enemies. Like, you're my enemy, you're my enemy, you're my enemy. But in reality, we are choosing to become what we are becoming.
Dude, yes. And then in 6, how he's like, but he gives us even more grace to stand against such evil desires.
Yeah.
Like, he's just constantly willing to give us grace and forgiveness and correction, and how and as we go through, we just came out of chapter 3 where he's talking about like the double-mindedness, and he's touching on it again here in a different way of like, you're friends with the world, you're becoming enemies with God, and he gives you grace. He's giving you this grace for this desire that's fighting within you. And then I feel like at 7, he starts to like give you the way to correct it. Like, he's like, humble yourself before God, resist the devil, he will flee from you. Come close to God, he'll come close to you. And this part I feel like is one very practical part, because when I see this, wash your hands and purify your heart, I feel like that to me is like washing your hands. It's like what you're doing. It's like the physical, like, what are you into? What are you getting into? Like, that's like, to me, is my hands. Like, it's like, you can tell where somebody's been.
Yeah.
You got grease in your hands. What have you been working on? And it's like, wash your hands, like wash what you're doing. Like, like these decisions you're making are leading your life in a direction. So that's showing up in what you're doing. And then he's like, purify your heart. And I feel like that's that belief. Like, you've got 2 belief systems in you right now. Like, purify that. Like, get rid of this friendship with the world that you keep being jealous and envious and quarreling and fighting and all. Like it. This is like where James brings the attention to it of how to fix it.
Yeah, it's extremely practical in that sense.
Like, your loyalty's divided between God and the world. And then he's just like, he allows it. Let there be tears for what you've done. Let there be sorrow, deep grief. Like, get eyes on it. Like, acknowledge it. Like, you were a part of this. Take ownership in it.
It's crazy when you brought up he gives us grace. I was just thinking about that whole like analogy of 2 different sides. It's like he's standing there just like, here's $10,000 if you want to come over here. I've got it. I've got everything you really want.
Like, nice try.
Yeah. You're like, no, I like what they got over here a little bit more. But he's just like, well, it's a briefcase full of money. What do you like about it? You know what I mean? But there's that, which it's like he's like, I'll give you everything you need to be free. And I think that's all of this comes down to freedom. It comes down to resisting the devil and being free from all of that. And sometimes we just we value the material things more than our own freedom. and comfort more than our own freedom. But it's clear to the Lord that when you pursue these, greed, materialism, proudness, pride, you forfeit your freedom.
Yeah.
And that's what's sad is it's like, I feel like as a 29-year-old now, like I'm like scratching on this for the first time in my life where it's like, Lord, I don't want to ever trade freedom, which is the most important thing, freedom of my heart, freedom of my mind, for other things. You know what I mean?
Like that willingness to humble yourself. When I hear him saying that at the end at 10, humble yourself before the Lord. It's just like, give up your own way. Let's go with the Lord's way, you know? And it's like, just to be willing to like that pride that you were talked about, to be willing to give it up and to come, like to just come under the leading of the Lord. Washing my hands. What am I doing? Like, get eyes on what am I doing in life, and what am I believing? What are these two things in me that want to believe two different things, and start addressing that.
This is the way.
This is the way. Let's keep going.
11.
I'm at 11. Don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. If you criticize and judge each other, then you are criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law, not to judge whether it applies to you. God alone, who gave this law, is the judge, and he alone has the power to save or to destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor? Look here. You who say today or tomorrow we're going to go to a certain town or stay there for a year, we'll do business there and make a profit. How do you know what your life will even be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here for a little while, then it's gone. What you ought to say is, if the Lord wants us to, we'll live and do this or that. Otherwise, you're just boasting about your own plans, and all such boasting is evil. Remember, it is sin to know what you ought to do and then not to do it. That's it.
That is so intense. It's insane to me.
Mm-hmm.
That, for everybody listening and watching, that is the most intense, one of the most intense statements I feel like in this entire Bible, of if you know what is right and the right thing to do and you do not do it, that is sin. Yeah. Ow. You know what I mean? Because think about how often it's so much easier to look the other way. You know what I mean? To see a need and go, no, or to hear someone say, we need you for this. We need help in this area, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that's too hard. It's too emotionally exhausting, blah, blah, blah. And be like, no. There's so many different things in life where, where it's just easier to just turn the other way because it's more convenient. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we forget that, like, every day, this is Rod Bricker talking, every day we make choices, and those choices either help our future or they take away from our future. And this is one of those where the Lord gives us opportunities every single day to do what is right. And when we do not do what is right, you don't even need to be doing the very act of the thing that is wrong, but you fall into it. It's just so intense. But I'm thankful for it because I think there's freedom. There's freedom in that because there's when you're walking this whole thing out, it kind of goes back up to the top of, like, when you have desires and quarrel and you fight and all of these different things, your passions are leading you. But if you can adjust those passions to do the right thing, then they will lead you into righteousness.
Yes.
Which is the opposite of sin.
Man. Dude, James is hitting me hard. He is just hitting me hard these past 4
He's going below the
chapters.
belt.
Dude, he's getting. It just is like it just causes you to have to like to stop and to think and to like just see what you're bringing to the table, because we're all bringing something.
Mm-hmm.
And then, dude, at the very end, that last thing, it's like there's things that it's a sin to know what you ought to do and then not to do it. Like, that is wild, man. Like, even in the way of just like the silence of like putting your head in the sand and whatever, or like the, like you said, just turning and looking the other direction, and because it's intense sometimes, you know, but.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that really got me here is where he says, instead you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. And that is, it makes me think of Bob Goff, because this idea, like, I currently work a job that I'm like, I don't want to be doing this the rest of my life, you know, but this idea of waking up every day and just being like, if the Lord wills, this is the job that I have, and I'm thankful for that. But the day that I wake up and say, Lord, what's your will today? And he says, I think it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what my next thing is. Well, trust me. You know, it's like, that's the kind of dependence James is talking about. But most of us, including myself, are like, well, he would never just wake you up one day and just be like, hey, it's time, move on.
Maybe though.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But
Yeah,
we tell ourselves that he would never
he
do
would
that.
to you.
Yeah. No. But it's like James is trying to create dependent Christians, not Christians led by their own passions.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can't be. That's the thing with like our mindsets, is we want to be independent, which means I do not depend on someone else for my own freedom. And the Lord is like, no, you have to depend on me for your freedom. And that part of dependency means waking up, going to the master and saying, what's today?
Dude.
You know?
And that, I think that that independence check for me falls back in that spot where we were talking about wash your hands and purify your hearts. Mm-hmm. Like, there's that independence of like, yes, I understand like physical freedoms of America and things like that, the independence and whatever, but just as a person, as an identity, like when Jesus said, pick up your cross, like and right before it, he says, deny yourself, like just to be willing to lay down the idea that I know who I am, I know who I'm going to be, I know what I want, and all of this stuff, where James is like, you're saying you're going to go here and you're going to do all these things and become something somewhere, and like you're going to find, you're going to make all this profit and build identity and establish yourself. And then he's like, your life's a vapor. Like, it's like, you don't know anything. And to be willing, like you said, to wake up and say, Lord, what do you have for me today?
Yeah.
And have identity in him, and for me to start washing my hands, like to take these days of like, what am I doing as a person, as a family, as a brother, son, uncle, whatever, just to look at myself and just to ask the Lord, God, start purifying my heart. Like, show me these things in me that are wanting me to say, I'm going to go do this apart from you, and I'm going to make, or hopefully you come with me, Lord. Yeah. And to lose that independence to become dependent, you know, and finding maybe, I mean, I'm not trying to be tricky with words, but real independence is finding my dependence in God. But James is challenging me.
It makes me think of the song, I'm lost without you. Whatever. Yeah, you know what I mean? It just makes you think of that, where you're like, every day, the more I choose to just do my own thing, the more and more lost I get. But the more I choose to be with him, I'm like, man, this is exactly where I need to be, you know, and the more fulfilled in life I am. And it's incredible. The more dependent we can get with him, the better we are. One thing, just before we end here. Yeah. So I've been reading this book, picked it up, brushed a ton of dust off of it because it was just I haven't picked it up in 10, 12 years. It's called The Furious Longing of God by Brennan Manning. And one of the chapters, which is it's a prayer I pray very often, and I always have since this book, but one of his prayers is Abba, I belong to you. And waking up every day, opening your hands up and just saying, Abba, I belong to you. And I've been praying that pretty frequently. And one of the things I feel like the Lord has been showing me is just that, not just like I belong to you, but like I'm a instrument within your studio. Mm-hmm. Like I belong to you. I am an object of your affection. That, we have cars and TVs and things that we look at and we're like, I like that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, but you're my belonging. When you belong to me, I look at you with just admiration, like love, exceeding joy, all those things. And part of that dependence is realizing that you need him to belong. Like you need to belong to something. You need to belong to God. And that's just been something that's really been just kind of breaking my heart all over again. I don't know how. I just felt like I needed to like bring that up of just like the Lord wants you to belong to him, because you are the object and the person of his affection. And I think the sooner we start seeing that he is absolutely obsessed with us, like unstoppably obsessed, I feel like the closer we get to that dependence, where you realize like, oh, he's actually safe, mm-hmm. and he doesn't just want to take away my desires and my passions. He wants to give me new passions and new desires that fulfill my heart, because these other ones don't scratch the itch.
Dude.
All
right, how do we send it? How are we going to send it this week?
Dude, I think what you said, looking at your hands and just saying, Lord, what's in my hands that's stealing from me, that's taking away from me, and just cleaning our hands. If that, and I feel like that's where you have to check your heart of like, Lord, what's taking away from me? Is it lust? Is it materialism? Is it greed? Is it jealousy? All those different things. Is it bitterness? Is, what's in my hands? What's the soil underneath my fingers that is still stuck, mm-hmm. That needs to get washed away.
Dude, let's do it. Send it, guys. Let's try that. Get in there. Do that. Check with the Lord. What are we up to? What are we doing? And what is that? What's the doubled mind? What are our belief systems that are crashing against God's?
Yeah.
And check those. Thank you so much for tuning in. The next episode is going to be wrapping up, James. So subscribe, like it, share it, and thank you so much for tuning in. Love you guys.
Bing bong.